everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to 1680 The Crow. I'm Liam Higgs, and this is your 12 o'clock news update. Let's get right into it with an update from Israel. Britain's Prime Minister says he supports a pause in the Israel-Hamas war to allow aid into Gaza. Tom Rivers from the ABC has the latest.
Speaking in Parliament, Rishi Sunak says he backs a humanitarian pause.
It's important that we do everything we can to get humanitarian aid to those who need it in Gaza, which is why on Monday we announced a doubling of our international aid to the region.
But pressed on supporting a full ceasefire, the Prime Minister rejected that call.
Israel has the right to defend itself under international law. Our support for that position is absolute and unchanged.
Tom Rivers, ABC News, London.
On to the rest of the world now. A tragic sight has occurred when Hurricane Otis has ripped through Mexico's southern Pacific coast. As a powerful Category 5 storm, reporter Alex Stone says Otis doused steep mountains and left a trail of damage in Acapulco before weakening.
We know shelters are open. Initial reports indicate significant damage in the region. The Mexican government says communication is out around Acapulco to get a full assessment of what they're dealing with right now.
Otis's arrival came just days after Hurricane Norma struck the southern tip of Mexico's Baja California peninsula to the north. Let's see what's going on with our friends across the border. The U.S. Postal Service says more than 600 people have been charged with postal crimes since a crackdown was launched in May. Reporter from the Associated Press, Tiffany Wang, has an update for us.
Letter carriers are on edge after nearly 500 of them were robbed last year. Criminals increasingly targeted the mail to commit financial crimes like altering checks to obtain money. The announcement on Wednesday came against a backdrop of rallies by the National Association of Letter Carriers across the country in recent months. They're calling for better protection of carriers and harsh punishment of criminals who rob them. The USPS is replacing tens of thousands of postal carriers' universal keys with electronic locks to reduce robbery and has deployed more than 10,000 high-security blue boxes in high-risk areas to prevent criminals from fishing out the mail. I'm Tiffany Wang.
Let's come back to Canada now. Residents of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario are calling this a sad and grim day, following Monday night's shooting that left 5 people dead, including 3 children. Canadian press reporter Fakik Bag is in Seoul.
The mayor of the city, Matthew Shoemaker, he said that, he described it as a very shocking, unspeakable tragedy in the community. He said that he's been hearing from locals who've been calling him, texting him, emailing his office just to express their condolences. Sault Ste. Marie is a very small community and everyone kind of knows everyone here.
Police have described the shootings that also left the shooter dead as a tragic case of intimate partner violence. On to some TransLink news. A reporter going to the Lower Mainland's Mayor Council today reveals that Transit Authority is facing a deficit of $4.3 billion. A deficit, sorry. The report notes that the deficit appreciated in the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, where there was significant decline in ridership and resulted in a suppressed fare revenue. While ridership has been recovering steadily, TransLink has been facing growing costs as a result of the inflationary pressures, particularly labor and construction costs. India's High Commission in Canada says the country's officials will resume processing some types of visa applications in Ottawa and at consults in Toronto and Vancouver. Dylan Robertson from the Canadian Press has more.
The decision comes a month after New Delhi suspended visa services in Canada and for Canadian citizens worldwide. Starting on Thursday, Indian missions in Ottawa and at consulates in Toronto and Vancouver will start issuing business, medical, and conference visas. India will also issue visas for people with family ties in India, but did not include information about other types of visas, such as those for tourists. Dylan Robertson, The Canadian Press, Ottawa.
On to some news now from Alberta. Alberta's Public Interest Commissioner has found what he calls serious lapses in medical care at a provincial correctional centre. Kevin Brzezinski's investigation responding to a whistleblower says Alberta's correctional health services failed in 5 cases to provide adequate medical care at the Edmonton Remand Centre. In 2 cases, the patients have died, while the other 3 were hospitalized. A nursing consultant who reviewed the patient records concludes the agency provided poor pain management as well as inadequate help with drug withdrawal and didn't monitor or record vital signs adequately. Brzezinski says Alberta's Correctional Health Services has responded to his concerns and he is satisfied with the changes. Let's move on west to Vancouver now. Mayor Ken Sim has announced a new holiday honoring one of the Parliament's members, Hedy Fry. Sim offers the following statement marking the declaration of Hedy Friday. Quote, "Today I am proud to proclaim October 25th Hedy Friday in Vancouver. The Honourable Hedy Fry was first elected as a Member of Parliament 30 years ago on October 25th, 1993. Since then, she has gracefully served her community and country for decades, becoming the longest-serving female Member of Parliament." End quote. In other BC news, on Thursday, Coquitlam RCMP frontline officers attended a serious 2-vehicle collision at Coast Meridian Road and David Avenue in Coquitlam. A passenger in one of the vehicles has since succumbed to their injuries and a driver remains in hospital. While first responders were on the scene for the collision, a Reg Dodge Dart disregarded city road closure barricades and police crime scene tape to enter the collision site. The vehicle narrowly missed emergency personnel as they continued the collision investigation. Police officers arrested a man and impounded his vehicle. No evidence was compromised by the vehicle as they entered the scene, and the file is still under investigation. In other news, nearly 20 new safe, affordable homes are available for women and their children leaving violence in Victoria with the opening of a new housing development. The recently completed development was brought to you by the province through BC Housing. It will provide 7 second-stage spaces and 12 permanent affordable apartments for women, including their children, leaving violence or other traumatic situations. The building has a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units, as well as an office and an amenity space. The building will provide women and their children the opportunity to seamlessly move from second stage units into a more permanent, affordable apartments. Let's check in, though, with our Premier David Eby. The sale of Premier David Eby's condo in Victoria has had plenty of controversy surrounding it because of the Democratic Party's law on short-term rentals. Eby was accused Tuesday of making large profits from the sale of his condo in 2019. Eby sold for $150,000 more than he paid, which some say is capitalizing on the province's explosion on short-term rentals. The government has proposed legislation that is directed at short-term rentals in an effort to increase long-term housing. Moving on to some highway safety now, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure will be celebrating the pending completion of safety improvements to Highway 1 through the Kicking Horse Canyon. Media have been invited to celebrate this Thursday. Let's get into some sports now, though, starting with the World Series. Corbin Carroll went 3 for 4 with 2 RBIs and 2 runs scored as Arizona advanced to the World Series for the first time in 22 years. Phillies designated hitter Kyle Schwarber says his team was outplayed.
They played great baseball, plain and simple. They beat us the series, and there's no ways around it. And it's definitely everyone's got a sick feeling in their stomach.
Arizona goes on to face the Texas Rangers in the World Series with Game 1 set for Friday night. Heading over to the NHL and specifically the Canucks now, it was a crazy day for hockey yesterday with all 32 teams playing with what would we call an NHL frenzy. However, last night the Canucks played in Smashville against the Predators, where returning scorer Ilya Mikheyev was able to slot one early against UC Saros on only the 3rd shot on net. Later on, Captain Hughes was able to get an assist on Niels Hoglander goal, and eventually the game ended 3-2 for the Vancouver Canucks. Goalie Thatcher Demko shared his thoughts on the victory after the game.
I think we got a little better each game on the road trip. In Tampa we were better than we were in Philly, and then Florida we were better than we were in Tampa, and then tonight was our best game. So.
Going over to the court now for some basketball, the Toronto Raptors tip off their new season tonight with a visit from the Minnesota Timberwolves. New head coach Darko Rajakovic had recently signed point guard Dennis Schroeder. Will lead a very different Raptors team onto the court at Scotiabank Arena. Continuing with basketball, the Phoenix Suns have opened their new NBA season by edging the host Golden State Warriors 108-104. Warriors head coach Steve Kerr says that was the first test of the season.
It's going to be a work in progress for us as we go these first few weeks, just trying to find the right rhythm, right combinations, that kind of stuff.
Plenty of NBA action coming up soon. Now, let's head over to some cricket. As Australia won earlier today against the Netherlands, Australia won by a whopping 309 runs. England is set to square off later today against Sri Lanka. That game starts at 1:30 our time. As of right now, England's win percentage is at an astounding 73% in that one. Currently, India, though, is running away with the standings, sitting at a perfect 5-0 to start the World Cup. Their next game is on Saturday. Into some weather now. Snowfall warning for southern Alberta ended by Environment Canada at 11:55 a.m. However, it's been an ugly few days in Vancouver, and it doesn't seem to be letting up at least right away. Today we have some rain, and it's going to be cloudy once again. However, it does get nicer towards the end of the week, so maybe get ready for some sun. The week's highs of 11 degrees also are not that bad. Thanks for joining me today. I'm your host, Liam Higgs, and that was your 12 o'clock news update from 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
On Wednesday, October 18th, environmental groups challenged the federal environment minister in court after he waited 8 months to issue protections to BC's endangered northern spotted owl.
Now, if you're already a little lost, you're not the only one. Today, we're going to discuss why this happened and what it means for our province's endangered species moving forward.
Welcome to Into the Wild. I'm your co-host, Jocelyn Chappelle.
And I'm your other co-host, Sonia Kutenbrauer. There's a lot to talk about here, so let's dive right in. Starting with the root of the issue, the northern spotted owl is facing near extinction.
That's right. Since 1995, the spotted owl population has seen huge decreases, anywhere from 50 to 75%. But in BC, we're closer to extinction than is comfortable to admit. As of right now, only one wild-born spotted owl is believed to live in our forests.
And these owls aren't just any old bird either. Spotted owls serve a necessary role in managing small rodent populations in our forests, and because they require a biodiverse habitat, they also serve as indication of a healthy forest.
The owls are also incredibly valued by the Spuzum Nation, whose land was home to dozens of these birds not too long ago, including the current sole surviving wild-born owl. The spotted owl holds deep spiritual value and is regarded as the messenger between this world and the spirit world.
Now, this threat of extinction is obviously not something that came out of nowhere. In fact, the spotted owl has been listed federally as endangered since 1986. The province even established a breeding program back in 2007 to prevent the owl's extinction. So, what gives? Why are populations still dwindling?
I can't say there's a single concrete answer to that, but if we look at the whole picture, the problem lies in the logging of old-growth forests, more specifically in the Fraser Canyon, where the owls would typically be found.
We've gone from whole clusters of intact valleys now to just remnant stands remaining, and that is what has caused the steep decline in spotted owl numbers.
Joe Foy is just one of many individuals working to prevent the owl's extinction. A protected areas campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, Joe spent this past summer in the Fraser Canyon to experience firsthand why the spotted owls are going extinct.
And I had gotten maps, our organization had gotten maps, where BC had issued logging permits. So we were able to overlap those recently issued logging permits with federally mapped critical habitat. And so I spent the summer photographing active logging operations in old forests mapped by the federal government as critical habitat.
Environmental groups have been criticizing the lack of consistency when it comes to what each government aims to prioritize. On one hand, we've got the federal government, who has mapped out protected areas in order for the owls to have a chance at recovery. And on the other, we've got the provincial government, who has approved logging in these same areas. Okay, now that we know a bit about one of the major reasons the spotted owl is going extinct, let's dive into what is being done to stop this from happening, and how all that led to a judicial review of the Environment Minister on Wednesday.
There is a ton of background and history to the legal proceedings of this situation, but for the sake of simplicity, let's start with the petition submitted back in October of 2022.
This petition was written up by the Wilderness Committee and their legal representation, EcoJustice, and sent off to the Federal Environment Minister, Stephen Guilbeault. The overall goal of this petition was to get an emergency order issued.
Unless you're a legal policy fanatic, you probably have no idea what an emergency order is, so here's a quick rundown. An emergency order is a general term and refers to ordering a province to adhere to a certain law or act on an immediate basis. Typically, it's used when the federal government finds risk to human or animal life, and it overrides the authority of a province in order to prevent that risk.
In this scenario, an emergency order would be issued under Canada's Species at Risk Act, otherwise known as SARA. This would have stopped the province from allowing 2,500 hectares of necessary habitat from being logged.
But for an emergency order to be issued, i.e. acted on, it requires a bit of a process, is that right?
That's exactly right. It's not as simple as it may seem, and also not as effective as one may think. for an emergency order to be issued, it first needs to be recommended to the Cabinet, who then have the right to approve it or not.
Let's jump to February of 2023. At this time, Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault confirms he has indeed received the petition and has determined that, yes, ongoing logging in the area is putting the survival of the spotted owl at risk.
This is an opinion he forms based on the petitioner's evidence. He then publicly communicated that opinion back to the Wilderness Committee and stated he intends on recommending an emergency order to the Cabinet.
Now, as silly as that may seem to have to reiterate, it's actually one of the most important pieces to this story and in this case.
Under the Species at Risk Act, Guilbeault has the obligation to make a recommendation for an emergency order if he believes there is a threat to the survival of the species.
Which, I mean, makes sense. If it's an emergency, why wouldn't you act urgently? No point in issuing an emergency order if it isn't urgent, you know what I mean?
Right, exactly. And not only does he not immediately make the recommendation in February, he doesn't make it in March, or in April, or in May, or June.
And this goes on for several months, but let's pause in June for a second, because that's when things really start ramping up. Jocelyn, what happens come June?
Well, at that point, the Wilderness Committee and Eco-Justice are not pleased with the lack of timely action and decide to follow through with filing a judicial review against the Environment Minister.
So now we know that was about an 8-month delay from coming to this opinion that there was logging that was going to happen this year in 2023 that was going to threaten the recovery of the species, to making the recommendation at the end of September, asking the court to determine whether that delay is something that is reasonable and allowed under the Species at Risk Act.
That was Andra Azevedo, one of the lawyers for Eco-Justice representing the Wilderness Committee in this case.
By filing this, the aim was to, as Andra says, determine whether or not Guilbeault was allowed to wait so long, but also to speed up the process of this order being recommended, which would hopefully help Cabinet to recognize the urgency in saving the spotted owl.
Before we jump to September, as she mentioned, let's first look at July. Jocelyn, what happened in July?
Well, the knowledge of the Environment Minister's plans were obviously not a secret, right? This was public knowledge at this point. The thing with actually issuing an emergency order is it takes away the authority of the provincial government, which obviously provincial officials are not the biggest fan of.
Another factor is how this emergency order would impact other elements of the equation, such as the logging industry. Our province relies on the economic boost from logging, so I think it's fair to say the province would do nearly everything to avoid having the emergency order issued.
And that's kind of what happened. I mean, I wouldn't say they did everything in their power to stop it because that would be a bit excessive, but by July, the provincial government was said to be lobbying to discourage the federal cabinet from approving the order.
Now, bear in mind, Minister Guilbeault hasn't even made the recommendation for the emergency order. Roughly 5 months have gone by at this point, and it's given the provincial government enough time to prepare.
And skipping to September, it seems the province was successful in that. On September 26th, Minister Guilbeault finally makes the recommendation, and by October 5th, it's rejected by the federal cabinet.
And you're probably thinking, well, that's the end of that, right? The recommendation was made and they said no. What more is the judicial review going to accomplish?
So before we get into the details of the judicial review, let's look at why our Federal Species at Risk Act is deemed so controversial.
I mean, we could really go on about this topic if we wanted to, but instead, let's hear from the experts.
The way our law is written is that the federal minister takes a recommendation for an emergency order to cabinet, and cabinet can say no. Groups, citizens, individuals, or organized groups make all this effort within a law that can be turned off without any explanation.
I think the problem is that the way the Species at Risk Act has been set up is, or at least how the federal government has applied the Species at Risk Act, is that it's allowed them to just wait rather than taking more proactive approaches to actually, for Environment Canada, let's say, to go out and actually look and try and assess whether there's imminent threats without necessarily needing to receive these kind of urgent letters from members of the public.
Sonia, let's summarize what we've learned so far.
Okay.
BC's northern spotted owl is endangered. Only one wild owl remains.
Right. And so Eco-Justice and the Wilderness Committee go to the Environment Minister and say, hey, we got to permanently prevent any logging from going through here, because if not, the species is going to die off.
The environment minister agrees. He's like, yeah, no, you're right. I'm going to recommend an emergency order. And then he waits 8 months to do so. Eco-Justice and the committee are like, hold on, you can't just wait several months. We're filing a judicial review to speed things up.
And then by the time the recommendation comes through, the province has gathered their resources and lobbied to the cabinet. Whether or not that had any deciding factor, the federal cabinet then rejects the order.
So why go through a judicial review?
So that's pretty typical of how these emergency orders have happened. Like, even just to get to an emergency order recommendation often involves some kind of legal action, and then yes, in the few cases that there's been actual orders made, it's also been often always the result of cases that have kind of led to that.
Historically, as Andrew says, fighting this process in court is the most effective way of getting adequate protections. Having an emergency order even recommended, let alone issued under SARA, is nearly unheard of.
In the 20 years of SARA's existence, the only 2 emergency orders issued, one for the western chorus frog and one for the sage grouse, both involved a judicial review to get the ball rolling.
Which is where we are now. We can't say for sure how this will play out, but in the meantime, the Wilderness Committee and Eco-Justice plan to continue fighting to save the habitat and the existence of the northern spotted owl.
We reached out to Environment and Climate Change Canada, who in a written statement says the federal government acknowledges the concerns and is working closely with its partners to ensure that a suite of measures to support spotted owl recovery are implemented.
They also stated the minister fulfilled his obligations under SARA and that they will not be issuing an emergency order at this time.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Into the Wild, and be sure to join us next time. I'm Jocelyn Chappelle.
And I'm Sonia Kutenbauer. Thank you for listening.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
From the Broadcast Center at BCIT's Burnaby Campus, this is All Talk Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Welcome, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Aaliyah Andres, and here are the news updates to 12:30. A driver who reportedly disregarded city road closures, barricades, and police crime scene tape at a fatal crash in Coquitlam has been arrested, according to the RCMP. Mounties say it happened in the area of Coast Meridian Road and David Avenue on Thursday, October 19th, while police were responding to a serious two-car crash. A passenger in one of the vehicles has since died from their injuries, while a driver is still in the hospital. Mounties explaining that the vehicle narrowly missed emergency personnel. Corporal Alexa Hodgins noting, "We want to remind the public to slow down and move over for emergency services as well as obey road closure signs. This provides all roadside workers and emergency personnel greater protection from accident and injury." BC Ferries has had an unreliable couple of months with cancelled sailings, chronic staffing shortages, and inconsistent service. The BC government coming to the company's defense during the legislature Tuesday afternoon. As Transportation Minister Rob Fleming explained, that BC Ferries is highly aware of the frustrations and has hired 1,200 new employees to help maintain smooth sailings. Moving on, a new record for low water at a BC reservoir have raised the stakes and urgency in the negotiations for a new Columbia River Treaty between Canada and the United States. The province is obligated by the 1961 Columbia River Treaty to continue sending water flow to the United States for low flood control and power generation purposes. University of Calgary professor Nigel Banks is an expert on the treaty and says the U.S. and Canada have been negotiating an update to the deal since 2018. But the Canadian dams play a big role in stabilizing water flows in both Oregon and Washington that American officials would likely want to retain. And now for a quick update in the Middle East. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has warned that it is on the verge of running out of fuel in the Gaza Strip, forcing it to sharply cut back relief operations. The territory has been blockaded and hit by devastating Israeli airstrikes since Hamas militants launched an attack on Israel more than 2 weeks ago. Hospitals in Gaza are struggling to treat masses of wounded with dwindling resources. Health officials in the Hamas-ruled territory say the airstrikes killed more than 750 people between Tuesday and Wednesday. And moving on to some devastating weather down south. Hurricane Otis has ripped through Mexico's southern Pacific coast as a powerful Category 5 storm. Otis's arrival came just 5 days after Hurricane Norma struck the southern tip of Mexico's Baja California peninsula. Photos and videos shared by local media Wednesday in Apaculo show the walls of buildings ripped off, flooded hotel room, collapsed ceilings, and rubble down trees living in the streets. And taking a look at our local weather, we are sitting at 9 degrees in Vancouver with a mix of sun and clouds and hopefully a clearing up tomorrow into the weekend with sunny skies. And those were your news updates to 12:30. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Aaliyah Andres, and you're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretnero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
Microlink, connecting you with your BCIT community. Hello everybody, my name is Tatiana Yakovleva and welcome to the first episode of Microlink for the fall term. I'm excited to be back. This episode has a lot in store for us. But first, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which BCIT's main campuses are located is the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the shared traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nations. To start us off, I sat down with Celine Loriot, the president of the Student Association, to talk about the new executive board, what their visions are, and what's next for us. Celine, why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name is Celine. I am the president of the BCIT SA and a nursing student at BCIT.
That's awesome. And with so many BCIT students, it's never just being a student. Everyone does so much, right?
Of course. I feel like there's a bit of something for everyone at BCIT.
Right. So let's start with a few students. Can you tell us something about the 2023-2024 executive team? What's the vibe? What's the energy? What are you guys bringing to the table?
So I feel so fortunate to be working with such an enthusiastic team. So please don't mind if I rave about some of them. Charlene, the chair of health sciences, is a fellow classmate and nursing student like me. She's an avid runner and hiker. Also, she is pursuing her neonatal specialty. Shelby, the VP Equity and Sustainability, is an accounting student and has an appreciation for Shrek. Feel like a lot of us do.
That's my girl.
And her cat named Kevin. Simran, the chair of Business and Media, is an international student who has a bachelor's in French from India. Also, she keeps students safe as a security guard at BCIT. Abdul is studying architecture and building technology. He likes sports and cars, but only the fast ones. Justin is the chair of computing and academic studies. He is in the computer systems technology program and the voice of Raisin Crane in the Strawberry Shortcake series and volunteers at RAPS Cat Sanctuary in Richmond once a week. Daniel, the chair of specialized transport, is studying aircraft maintenance engineering. He is also serving Canada in the armed forces.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, very dedicated. Lastly, Jimmy, the VP External, is an electrical engineer student and a Lego connoisseur. I could go on about Mia, Rishank, Josh, and Matthew. And if I did, we'd probably be here for a couple hours.
That's fair. We did hear from Mia and Vershank and a lot of the returning execs already. If you haven't checked out the previous interviews, I strongly recommend to doing so. Well, Celine, enough about your team. I want to hear about you. What do you bring to the executive team as the president?
As I mentioned, I am a nursing student in my final year, so I've really honed how to stay calm under pressure and how to think critically. Before this role, I served as the BCIT SA Chair of Health Sciences, and based on that, I know how it feels to be new at the SA. Therefore, I really try my best to set up my executives for success by regularly checking in, acting as a soundboard for new ideas, and encouraging self-care in work-life balance. I firmly believe that the president should share power and leadership is best when it's collaborative. My priority is that students should feel seen, heard, and valued. It's not about being president that motivates me, it is serving the SA mandate of enhancing student life.
Can you briefly touch on what enhancing student life means to you?
So, enhancing student life is really listening to the students and delivering on what their current needs are. One of these mission projects that I'm working on is supporting students' mental health and awareness at BCIT. I plan on continuing with my Campus Convos events, which are mental health workshops with guest speakers shared over a meal at small round tables. This was actually a shared initiative with Josh Liu, the VP Student Experience that we started last year. So I'm definitely excited to continue with this initiative. Also, I want to boost student resilience and foster that sense of community by hosting more social events. I want to make BCIT more fun.
I personally root for paint night, so maybe you can make it happen one day.
For sure.
Okay, we got one vote in. Hopefully it'll get through. As a nursing student, what is the value of mental health? I'm sure you know that more than I do. So can you please briefly touch on that and the magnitude that it carries?
So I started my nursing studies in the peak of COVID. Right. And that was the strangest time of my life, right? Because instead of practicing in the community, we were practicing with simulation mannequins, right? So I think for me, mental health is so important because the pandemic made us more disconnected, right? And I think being a nursing student puts me in a unique position to really be in tune with what's going on around me in my environment and have a sense of what's going on for people and how I can really use my compassion to help others. Yeah, I think that's why mental health awareness, especially for students at BCIT, is so important to me.
Is that the main reason you got into nursing?
Yes, because I have had the privilege of growing up with lots of inspirational nurses, and I think just seeing the impact they had on their communities and, you know, sure, no one is ever going to remember their names all the time, but people
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikki-King.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikki-King. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.